confuse them, because otherwise you can get derailed. You can get thrown off course. If you're taking notes, to put it another way, what you should do and what someone else's response is going to be are two very different issues. Please write that down. What you should do and what somebody else's response should be are two very different issues. And you want to make sure that you don't get them confused. Now, when you start the difficult conversation, and this is where we left off last time, it's very critical that you know the difference between hurt and harm. The difference between hurt and harm. Generally speaking, anytime we're confronted, it hurts. Even when the Holy Spirit convicts us, at times it can hurt. Because you can say, oh man, I thought I was further along than this. I've been struggling with this for so many years. But there's a big distinction between hurt and harm. The difficult person, when you're having the conversation, they're going to try to sway you into thinking that you've harmed them, which means to almost maim, or you've done something malicious against them. You've wounded them. But the truth, as we know, all truth is confrontational. So you're going to have to, as you sit down to have the difficult conversation, number one, you don't want to let yourself be thrown off by their response. Just keep remembering our ship illustration. No matter how many waves keep coming towards the ship, even if the ship gets thrown off temporarily, it recalibrates and gets going in the right direction. Number two, when you're having a difficult conversation, you're going to have to make sure that you can distinguish between hurt and harm, because their response, they're going to come strong against you. You want to make sure that you don't confuse the two. When someone gets confronted on spending patterns that are out of control, they're going to react strongly. When someone gets confronted, perhaps if they have alcohol or substance abuse, they're going to react strongly. When someone gets confronted about their anger or their temperament, whatever it is, it's almost like you should expect them to react in a very strong way. You should expect or anticipate that they're reacting as though you're harming them. And you need that. This is why oftentimes you may even need to leverage your spiritual family before you have the difficult conversation, because you need people to pray for you and to undergird you. You may even need to run through some of the scenarios, because remember, like the ship, they're going to keep throwing waves at you in an effort to send you and the conversation in a direction that's contrary to what's on your heart and what needs to be shared. I like how Proverbs 27:6 puts it. It says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Because you're looking for people who, see, all of us are in desperate need of truth. And we're in desperate need of people who can bring reality to us. Because most of us are experts at deceiving ourselves. And when we don't deceive ourselves, the enemy is an expert on trying to deceive us. He's the father of lies, John 8:44 tells us. So that's why family's so important. Have you ever been around someone and you said, how in the world did they reach that conclusion? And then you realize that they weren't talking to anyone else? You know what it's kind of like? I don't know about in your neighborhood, but do you recall when you were growing up, there was always like one family in the neighborhood where they didn't interact with anybody else? And we'll just call them the Joneses. And it's like, they played with each other, they stayed in their backyard, but they wouldn't speak to anybody. And you always had this eerie feel like, oh, the Joneses, those folks are a little off. Something's different about them. You know why? Because nobody else was bringing reality to them. Reality was what occurred on the Joneses' property. But that may not have been, that wasn't a true indication of true reality. So you need people who can, this is why if you're a fortunate person if you have a good spouse or you have a parent. You also need people who aren't impressed by you. Yes. You need people who aren't impressed by you, who will speak the truth in love. That's what I love about old people. They just don't care. I mean, have you ever gone to the bank and there's like a lady, an old lady in front of you, and she's got like some purple pants on and an orange shirt, and she's taking her sweet little time, and you can stare at her 19 different ways. She's not going to pick it up one bit because she's making her monthly deposit. There's something about older people. You know, Dennis and Edmay were at my grandmother's funeral. And my grandmother died at 102. And one thing about my grandmother, tiny lady, but everyone knew her as a straight shooter. I mean, she never sugarcoated anything. And, you know, it's funny, you know, she ate her dinner every day at 1. And my 2 aunts took care of her. So my 80-year-old aunts were taking care of my 102-year-old grandmother. But anyway, talking about speaking the truth in love, my grandmother, when she would go to church, even at 100, 101, 102, it was a small church, and the pastor used to wait at the steps to greet people as she walked in. So when she would come in with my aunts, she'd look at the pastor and she'd say, "Now, all right, Rev, I eat dinner at 1, so don't be long today." She was going right towards her destination. She wasn't going to be derailed. His response wasn't going to impact what was on her heart. And she used to say, "All right, Rev, I eat dinner at 1, so don't be long today." Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Listen to Proverbs 19:19 as it relates to our discussion. This is a powerful verse. It says, "A man of great wrath will suffer punishment." Remember, when you have to have the difficult conversation, not all the time, but oftentimes you're going to get a strong pushback. It might be passive aggressive. It might be outright anger. It might be they try to flip the script and talk about, well, what makes you think? You're going to get a strong pushback. Notice what Proverbs 19:19 says. "A man of great wrath will suffer punishment." Listen, "For if you rescue him, you will have to do it again and again." You know what this verse is saying? This verse, Chris Burge paraphrase, this verse is saying that if you let somebody's response throw you off, then what they're doing is they're training you not to speak the truth in love by trying to intimidate you by their anger. Wow. It says, listen, it says, if you rescue them, in other words, if you don't speak the truth in love, if you don't have the difficult conversation, if you don't put it on the table, if you allow their response to intimidate you, then what you've done is you've educated and trained them how to prevent you from speaking the truth in love, which is what we're called to do with one another.